I feel like in coming out as an undocumented person, you not only empower yourself and empower others that could be in your situation that might hear your story, but you build a community behind you. I know there's a lot of people, and I used to be one of those people, that grew up with this just innate fear of even talking about this outside of your house. You know, about talking about that your family doesn't have papers, that you could be deported at any moment. And the fear that comes with that is very real, because at any moment your life can be taken from you. The life you know. But what I would say is, you know, take it at your own pace. But for me, it's probably been the best decision I've ever made in my life. It's changed my life completely. I went from cleaning houses with my mom to now leading some of the biggest decision-making spaces for immigration reform because I shared my story.
So for me, I am undocumented, but I'm also gay. So the last 2 years have been a process of coming out twice, a lot of different times. But I think for both, like being undocumented and being, a lesbian, it's being like you grow up and you're told like don't tell anybody what you are, or like because you just grow up with this huge sense of shame, and like these cultures of fear, like what would happen if like someone knew who you really are, kind of thing. So I think for me, like coming out, the importance of coming out as undocumented, but also as LGBT is sort of like I'm not ashamed about who I am, and by saying that you're not ashamed about who you are, you also empower yourself, and I feel like you're also leading by example. So for example, my 2 younger sisters, they're also scared, of legal repercussions, but they kind of saw that I'm not afraid and that they also don't have, they don't need to be afraid either. And when I also came out as undocumented, I realized that I had a huge support network of people who were like, you're amazing, like don't worry, or anything like that. So that was nice as well. So yeah. I think for me, I grew up feeling really shameful and like apologetic about who I was, and that's why I'm wearing this shirt today. It's like undocumented, unafraid, and unapologetic, because I realized like who I am is like a very valid, and like my existence is something to be celebrated, kind of thing. So like I guess growing up I was always like, oh my god, I'm never gonna tell anyone, this is really embarrassing. But now I'm like, no, everyone's gonna know who I am. Like I'm gonna be out in all the spaces that I occupy because who I am is a valid person, kind of thing. So
I think going from a place of being fearful and isolated to going to a place that's, empowered and I guess just that sense of community has been really valuable for me. And I will say, I don't know what I would be doing right now if I hadn't come out as undocumented. I think community organizing and the work I got myself involved in through sharing my story has been extremely therapeutic for me personally, because not only did I go through that experience of coming out and losing that fear, losing that shame, but I've been able to walk other people through that experience. And I always feel like change always starts in the hearts and minds of people, and whenever you're able to change someone's perspective, just one person, and walk them through that process, it's just been a tremendously therapeutic process for me. Right now, there's a lot of talk about these enforcement measures being included in immigration reform, and many of the Democrats justify that because they need bipartisan support. I can't emphasize enough how much these enforcement measures only hurt our country and hurt our communities. Any immigration reform we pass that includes enforcement measures, I just feel like not only is it really inhumane, but it's just ineffective. These past 4 years, our communities have been torn apart and experiencing the worst enforcement in the history of this country. And the fact that we're talking about putting drones at the border, like, what is this? What kind of people are we trying to keep out here? Frankly, I don't see the difference between my family and myself and the people that would come 2 days after an immigration reform passed.
I guess with me, what I had problem with recent legislation that was passed, for example, DACA, while it's helpful, DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, while it's great and all, what it does, it effectively criminalizes our community. So, for example, if you're someone who didn't get to finish high school because you were discouraged about your future life plans, but if you're a mother or a parent, you have no resources at all. You're effectively still able to be deported. So like my mother, for example, she came here, she works as a hotel maid, she gets like $5 an hour, and that sort of thing, but she can be deported at any hour, and she has not committed a crime. Her only crime was bringing me and my siblings here for a better life.
I want to chime in a little bit here too. So I couldn't agree more with what you both just said, but I'm also at the same time thinking about the political constraints that exist in terms of the nature of the debate right now. And I am also older than you guys, so maybe more cynical and less empowered and inspired, more beat up by life, I don't know. So I would need young people who are very articulate about these issues like you guys are. You're doing a really, really important thing with the work that you're doing. And I'll probably cry at some moment because it makes me very emotional. But there is, unfortunately, talking about criminalization and militarization, like the drones are an extension of a process of criminalization and militarization that have been going on since 1986. And it's not just a product of this particular political moment. And I know I'm not saying anything that you guys don't already know, but just to like put into the conversation that's going to be in this video, like it's very difficult to undo that structure now. That's both a political and economic one. There's a lot of, just take a crass economic perspective, economic interests in and profit being made on immigrant detention centers, which are mostly for profit. The companies who own drones, Halliburton, which is very much in charge of militarizing and securing, quote unquote, our southern border. They have very powerful lobbies in Washington, and so they're going to, it's not just Republicans and Democrats can't get along. There are extremely powerful economic interests here that are pushing back hard against what you're saying. And they have in their advantage the outcome of militarization is that it's not effective. It is destructive, you're right. But what it is it's not effective at controlling immigration, but what it's very effective at doing is it's a political theater that performs the criminality of undocumented immigrants every day. And then people who don't take the time to be really informed about these issues are just like, well, you did break our laws, so therefore you are a criminal, even though actually it's not a criminal offense, but you know, people don't make that distinction. And so then lawmakers can say, well, how could we have progressive reform? Because what about the rule of law, right? And so I am made hopeful by the failure of the Republicans the last couple of elections, because you're right, it's been a wake-up call for them to kind of recalculate their discourse and policymaking around this. But it remains to be seen, because like you, I was disappointed by the bipartisan new bill that includes a lot of increased militarization. I'm like, really? We need to increase it more than what we're already doing? Where for immigrants, we basically already live in a police state. So I am scared that it's going to be really hard. I don't see how we undo all of that. I think the DREAM Act, while you're right, it only helps a certain group of people, would be better than nothing, and it has a better chance of succeeding because people are sympathetic towards, children were brought here against their will, you can't punish them for the, I don't agree with that narrative, but it works better than just, it's going to be hard convincing people in general that folks who broke immigration laws should get a break.
Right. But I take it to the question of why did they break the immigration laws, and look at the history. And in their mind, they're not breaking a law, they're doing what every mother and every father needs to do and wants to do for their children. So it's like, historically there was a time when the United States needed labor and needed folks to come here and build the railroads and do all that good stuff. So they went out there and gave out free tickets and free train passes and said, come up north, right? So they encouraged a whole bunch of people to come here, build the railroads, provide the labor, and when the need for labor got over, they suddenly became criminals. And suddenly the immigration law made it not okay for them to come. So, it's not fair then to suddenly have a law which stops them from coming. And just a few years ago, and 50 years is not that much, it was what we wanted, so.
Yeah, we created a history of actively encouraging people to migrate here, especially from Latin America, but not only.
And then the other thing is, our policies create a context for people to leave, right? So we need to even consider those. Why are people coming? Why are they leaving? So if they were living in economically prosperous homes, I don't think anyone would leave. So they're not. And I think the United States government has a role to play in the context that folks live in, right? So I just feel like we have to go beyond that one question of they came here illegally, or why did they come? What was going on in their country that made them come?
I always share this story where a police officer comes into the classroom and, talks about, drugs and all this stuff. Growing up as an undocumented person in an undocumented family, always having that fear, it's so deeply ingrained in me, and then just having to sit in a classroom for like an hour
With a cop, yeah.
Yeah, as like a child, like with a cop, just like, oh my God, it's changed your perspective of everything and on many things, because it's your life experience. But I would say that if I could do it all over again, would I, if I had a choice in coming to the U.S., would I come? I think I would. It's built my character. It's a lot of things. I think being undocumented makes you grow up 10 times faster,
Oh, yeah.
which is, why a lot of people are surprised I'm only 21. But it's just, it's what comes with it. And they're experiences that I think, they're lessons you can never learn in a classroom. So.
I feel like I look at things so much differently than my brother, who was born here, and he's a U.S. citizen. He's actually in the U.S. Army. He just came back from Afghanistan. He never questions, he says I say the man a lot, and so he's like, why are you such a hippie? Why are you such a broad-burning feminist? I'm like, don't you understand that there are inherent problems in the U.S. that you haven't inherited because you were born here and are a U.S. citizen, are a male and are straight? And he's just like, oh my God, calm down, But I think a big part of it, is I was born without certain things, and I realizing that these are basic human rights, and I didn't have them, and he gets to have them because of certain privileges that he has. So I feel I definitely look at things differently than people who had parents born in the U.S., but also from people who have a certain, who have who are straight, who are males, who, that sort of thing. So yeah.
I think the sense of, you understand at a very young age you have to work twice as hard as everyone else to get to the same place. So for sure, definitely, I definitely feel like I view this country differently. Do I still love this country? Yes, this is the only country I know. I came here when I was 6 months old, But yeah, I understand there's changes that need to happen too.
I think too that, I was born here, my parents were born here, so I've not had the experience that you guys have had at all, but I have had, I want to make sure that we get into the video the fact that, both of these young ladies are college students, right?
Yeah.
And I have had a number of undocumented students who come tell me they're undocumented after I teach a class about immigration policy history, and I'm clearly very critical of it, so they're like, oh, maybe she wouldn't mind knowing that I'm undocumented, and they'll come, and I was calling them coming out stories too, because they are very similar, I think, to coming out as gay or lesbian. And these students, yes, grow up way faster than your average American student. They're dealing with fear, and you guys are dealing with fear and trauma all the time. Here we have Arcadia, we have a lot of commuter students, so every time you're coming and going from school, you're afraid that you're going to get stopped by police and end up in an immigrant detention center, while you're also just trying to get through college. You're worried about your parents, will your parents be there when you get home, all of that stuff. And you're talking about working 10 times harder than everybody else. It's a lot of people, I find, even other professors, don't know that you can go to college in the U.S. if you're undocumented, but you could, so it's not illegal to do that, but it's very expensive because you can't get access to student loans. Most states you can't have in-state tuition. And so either your family is wealthy, which is usually not the case, right?
Yeah.
Or you're getting merit-based scholarships, which means you're the top of your class. So the I just want you, the university community, to know the undocumented students in your class are the ones getting the straight A's, who are super mature, who are doing the best work in your class, and they're not whatever the stereotype people might have of an undocumented person.
The other thing I see, and Hillary's doing a great job with it, is academically disseminating information. You know, there's a lot of little clips in the media, but if you look at journal articles that are peer reviewed that get academic respect, there's very little out there. There's very, very little out there. So first of all, doing research with a vulnerable population is hard. Finding a sample is hard. Then actually finishing that research with some kind of funding is hard. And then to get a journal to publish it, you know, that's such a difficult thing.
It is
but then you
difficult.
are doing it, you know, but we need more people like you to get the word out in a different avenue, an academic avenue.
I'm a cultural and linguistic anthropologist. Not usually the crowd of people that gets tapped to be an expert witness on policy issues because I don't know how to run statistics. I do qualitative research. And also, actually, though, anthropology journals will publish this kind of stuff, right? So it gives me a little bit more freedom,
bit, yeah,
right?
yeah.
But so for my research is, I finished one project that I'm completing a book on right now, and then I'm starting a new one, and they're both looking at Mexico-U.S. migration. And I've lived in Mexico for long periods of time and also live with migrant communities, and specifically in Pennsylvania. And for me, I feel like the main thing that experience has given me is really understanding the complexity, the holistic complexity of what brings people into this country, including the incentives our own history of immigration policy have created. And another thing I'd add into, you were saying I don't understand, or I can't be sympathetic to the counter arguments. I'm not really sympathetic to them, but there are pieces of them I understand. And the two main things I think we, as people who want to see change, have to find intelligent responses to that do take on their perspectives. Because if you're just like, I don't want to hear what you have to say, no one's going to listen to you, you know?
I would have to
And
agree.
so the one thing is, everybody in the U.S., not everybody, but one of our founding principles is a rule of law that applies equally to everybody, in theory. We all know it doesn't, right? I just taught a class this morning about mass incarceration in the U.S., which disproportionately involves incarceration and heavy sentencing of African Americans and Latinos versus everybody else, right? So right? Our rule of law is not fair and equal, right? But as a principle, it is a founding principle of our democracy that in theory I agree with, and in fact was arguing for this morning when I was saying that our criminal justice system is racist, right? And so then if I think that, how can I argue that with one hand and then say that people who broke our immigration laws should be given separate treatment? Right? And I think you can make that argument. It goes back to what you were saying, where we have a long history and tradition, and our economy has depended on immigrant labor for over 100 years, and it still does.
Yes.
That period, you were kind of talking like as if that period was over 50 years ago.
No, it hasn't.
It's not.
Yeah.